Why don't you tell us a little bit how you got started and when you started writing, and then kind of how you ended up doing what you're doing now?
So my saga starts forever ago. So I'll try to summarize it as much as I can. I actually didn't learn to read or write until I was 10. And that was due to like multiple factors that were going on in my life. And when I finally, and it was one of these things where I found reading to be like the most ostentatious thing to do because like everybody wanted me to do it and I didn't want to do it. And so like the more like you push kids to do things they don't want to do, like the more
Mm.
resistance they get, right? And my gateway into reading was actually comic books, right? Because you have to read the dialogue to really understand what's going on. So once I started reading comic books, so the ones I really got into was actually Sonic the Hedgehog by Archie, right? And then I found out that they had like little booklets that went with it. So I got the booklets, and the next thing you know, I'm reading like everything. You can't like all the books I was gobbling them up like Cookie Monster, right? And so, but that didn't transfer into writing. What ended up happening is I think I was in fifth grade. Yeah, I was in fifth grade and I read this book for a book report, and I was really fed up because the ending of the book was so abrupt that I was extremely dissatisfied with it. And there was nothing in the book or the publication to indicate that there was going to be a book two, right?
Hmm. Which is
So
always the
I,
worst.
yeah. So I was just reading it and I was like, this is like, and at one point, like my teacher could see my face and she's like, what's wrong? I was like, this is like the most shit ending I have ever read. And so she told me for my project, what I could do is I could rewrite the ending of the book, and then that would count towards my final project. So therefore, I wrote my first 10 pages of author stuff. So that made me feel really good.
It's
Um, and,
awesome.
and then kind of on and off after that, I wasn't like really into it until high school because I kept reading like really bad books and I kept like wanting to rewrite them like I did with that one, right?
Mhm.
And my English teacher really hated me because because the English teacher, the one that I had, would want us to write like a page of using the vocabulary words in a sentence. So I would turn in like 20 pages of story with like the vocab words like kind of like snuck in there, right?
Yeah.
So she
Right.
would have to read it. I wouldn't even like bold or highlight, like she'd have to actually look for it, right?
Right.
But then I joined the military, and the military kind of killed a lot of the drive to read or write. And it wasn't until probably like 5 years later I started getting into it again, but it was for fan fiction because I was like, this is easier to do. So I was really into doing DBZ fan fiction. I was really into doing Zelda and what was the other one? No, it's just those two. Those were like the two main ones. I tried to dabble in like two other things, and I was just like, nah. And then the big book effort happened actually when I used to be a teacher because one of the things that they told us in orientation is that you should have a second job, right?
Right.
So I was like, that's the beginning of the end. Like my first year, it's like, don't forget to like make sure that you scheduled out your second job accordingly. So I thought a
Yeah.
book would be good passive second income. I've learned more since then.
Right.
But so, I spent a year writing my first book, which is called Queen of Swords and Silence, and it got accepted by a publisher, and it is still published, but it's under my name now. And that is where like the giant professional author learning curve really started. And I learned some things through good advice, through hard experience, and I probably have a lot more to learn. So that was really convincing all of that there.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a lot there to unpack. What First off, thank you for your service. What branch of the
Air,
military were you in?
Air Force, Chair
Air
Force, as
Force.
we like to say it. Yeah.
Nice. I'm from a military family, so my dad was in for 30 years and in the National Guard here in Iowa, and my brother's still in. My grandparent, everyone, whole
Mm-hmm.
whole family line. So that's awesome. So I love that you talked about the kind of learning to read and write a little later because so my daughter is 10 right now and she can read and write, but she really has struggled to get into reading. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of one of those she can and she does, but she just really like she doesn't want to read a book or whatever. So she found the Dogman books. I don't know if you've ever seen those. They're kind
Mm-hmm.
of like a graphic novel, and
Mm-hmm.
she loves them. And so that was kind of like she finally found something that she loved to actually read and
Mm-hmm.
get.
Yeah, and that's the trick because, like, I think as adults, because we have like a more cultivated reading experience, that we think that there's certain books that we really like that the kids are going to like them as well, realizing that we're not actually like 8 or 10 year olds that with different priorities, right? And there's always like this stigmatism about like graphic novels as well, especially with kids, because we still have like this mentality that it is like for children,
Mhm.
right? But even kids' books can discuss like really adult topics. Like I actually have one here. So this is actually by the daughter of one of the artists that I work with over at Rippaverse. His name is Kanan White, and her name is Samantha White. And so
Yeah.
she made this beautiful children's book. and it talks about grief. So when you lose somebody dear, and it talks about it from like the point of view of like a child,
Yeah.
right? And it's beautiful. It's called A Piece of You, and it has to do with a child when she's reflecting about the loss of her loved one, while the sweater that she has is like slowly unraveling, so all she has left is like a thread,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and so like I think people forget that there are like really important topics that we can discuss in this medium, but because we're so fixed that cartoons are for kids, we forget that.
Yeah. Definitely. I am. I'm all for really any medium. I think any medium can tell a great story, and it's all about, the intent behind it and what you
Mm-hmm.
want. And to me, again, it's like for my daughter, it's like I just wanted her to read something. So
Mm-hmm.
for her to find that and do that, I think is great. So so you have a book that's published traditionally, but are most of your other ones self-published then?
Yeah, so everything at this point is all published through me. So and it's a little tricky for me to talk about it. So the best way I can say it is that I am legally under requirement to not talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But so basically, I had a publisher that had my book. We went through a thing, and now I've got my book rights back.
Mm-hmm.
So, but before then, I was traditionally published. I was actually going to be I was published through a smaller house, but they've since closed, which you're going to find is really common because unfortunately, making money in publishing is really hard. So, lots of publishing, smaller ones will start. And then if they don't get enough traction within like 2 years, they have to close down.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I was with another one that was kind of mixed media, and don't know if they're still around or not, but then pretty much since then I've just done it all through me because I have full creative control, which is the pro, and then the
Mm-hmm.
con is that I have full creative control,
Right.
right? So yeah, when you start self-publishing and you get really familiar with like the business aspects of it, it
Mm-hmm.
really changes like the whole way that you write. Because I think when we originally start writing, we're very whimsical with it. We're kind of like, I'm just going to write some words and put some characters in there. But then when you move into like the business side of it, you sit there and start writing, and then you stop and be like, is my target audience actually going to read this passage? Because I don't
Yeah.
think they are, right?
Yeah.
So.
It's kind of that it's that balance between, like, I think why self-publishing really works for a lot of people right now is you can write the story you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
You're not put into a box just because you're with a publisher. But that also, you still have to write something good. So you can't
Mm-hmm.
fool yourself. So you gotta be kind of, there's a middle ground there of like, you gotta write something that's gonna work for people, but also remain true to what you want to write.
Yeah, like some would say that this was a tasteless thing that I did. But like, in 2020, I wrote a short story. It's called Quarantined with My Avatar,
Mhm.
right? And originally I was going to have it be part of an anthology because like during that time, like everybody was really stressed out. And so like I thought like, what if we all just get together and make a story, and then that way we'll take our mind off of things, right?
Mhm.
The anthology didn't come around, but I did finish my story. And so a lot of people didn't want to read it when it came out in 2020 because they're like, quarantined is not a good word. It was like a bad word
Mhm.
at that time.
Yeah.
But I still did it, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I still had like the theme of at some point you're quarantined for some reason in there.
Mhm.
So that was it. It doesn't sell very well, but it was definitely something that I wanted to put out there. So as long as you go in knowing that it's probably not going to hit the market the way that you want, then you're fine. If you go in like thinking I'm going to make buku bucks and I'm going to be on the night show or something like that, then that's just delusional.